Glossary. Adoption studies. Study design whereby the similarity between children and their biological parents is compared to the similarity with their adoptive parents to compare shared genes against shared environment. Aggression. Any form of behavior intended to harm or injure another living being who is motivated to avoid such treatment. Aggression questionnaire, AQ, self-report instrument to measure stable individual differences in trait aggressiveness. Aggressive cues, situational cues with an aggressive meaning that increase the accessibility of aggressive cognitions. Aggressive driving, behavior intended to physically, emotionally, or psychologically harm another within the driving environment. Aggressive scripts, cognitive representations of when and how to show aggressive behavior. Alcohol myopia, alcohol-caused reduction of attentional capacities that hampers a comprehensive appraisal of situational cues. Anger, a syndrome of relatively specific feelings, cognitions, and physiological reactions linked associatively with an urge to injure some target. Anger management training, convey to aggressive individuals an understandable model of anger and its relationship to triggering events, thoughts, and aggressive behavior. Anger rumination, perseverative thinking about a personally meaningful, anger-inducing event. Antisocial behavior, behavior that violates social norms about appropriate conduct. Behavior genetics, field of study devoted to the genetic basis of social behavior. Big Five personality factors, basic dimensions of individual differences, consisting of openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Bobo doll paradigm, using a large inflatable doll, Bobo, to show that adults' aggressive behavior towards the doll leads to imitation by children who observe their behavior. Bullying, also known as mobbing, denotes aggressive behavior directed at victims who cannot easily defend themselves, commonly in schools and at the workplace. Catharsis, release of aggressive tension through symbolic engagement in aggressive behavior. Cognitive neo-associationist model explains aggressive behavior as the result of negative affect that is subjected to cognitive processing and activates a network of aggression-related thoughts and feelings. Collective violence, instrumental use of violence by people who identify themselves as members of a group against another group or set of individuals in order to achieve political, economic, or social objectives. Competitive reaction time task, CRTT, measure of aggressive behavior in the lab in which participants assign aversive stimuli to an alleged opponent if they are faster in responding to a signal detection task. Concomitant heat approach, method for testing the heat hypothesis by manipulating room temperature and observing covariations between temperature and aggressive behavior. Conflict tactic scales, CTS, instrument for measuring intimate partner violence by collecting self-reports of perpetration and/or victimization. Confluence model, model explaining men's sexual aggression by the two pathways of impersonal sex and hostile masculinity. Cyberbullying involves the use of modern technology, such as computers, mobile phones, or other electronic devices, to inflict intentional harm on others. Dehumanization, tendency to deny outgroups the quality of being human. De-individuation, loss of personal identity as a result of being in a crowd or immersed in a specific role. Delegitimization, categorization of a group or groups into extremely negative social categories that are excluded from the realm of acceptable norms and/or values. De-radicalization, process of rejecting the ideology underpinning the membership in a terrorist group. Desensitization, process whereby the ability of a stimulus to elicit arousal becomes weaker with each consecutive presentation. Deterrence theory, Theory that preventing crime requires the development of a system of punishment that will teach the lesson that crime does not pay. Direct aggression. Aggressive behavior directed immediately at the target, such as hitting or shouting abuse. Direct reinforcement. Experience of positive consequences of aggressive behavior, e.g., status gain among peers, that increases the probability of future aggressive acts. Disinhibition. Weakening the inhibitions against showing aggressive behavior, e.g., by repeated exposure to violence in the media. Displaced aggression. Tendency to react to frustration with an aggressive response directed not at the original source of the frustration, but at an unrelated, more easily accessible target. Dual hormone hypothesis postulates that it is the combination of high testosterone and low cortisol that promotes aggressive behavior. Emergent norm theory. Theory of crowd behavior, proposing that members base their behavior on what they perceive to be the specific norms shared among the group. Emotional abuse. Failure to provide a developmentally appropriate supportive environment. Epigenetics. Field of study showing that adverse experiences may change a person's genes related to aggressive behavior. Essay evaluation paradigm. Measure of aggressive behavior in the lab, whereby participants assign negative feedback on an alleged co-participant's essay. Excitation transfer theory. Transfer of neutral physiological arousal onto arousal resulting from frustration, thus augmenting negative affect and increasing the strength of an aggressive response. Executive function. Cognitive activities that govern goal-directed action and planning of behavior and enable adaptive responses to novel, complex, or ambiguous situations. Family aggression. Behavior carried out with the intention to inflict harm on a family member or a close other, for example, a stepchild, residing in the same household. Field experiment. Manipulating conditions in everyday situations to observe the effects of the manipulation on the likelihood of aggressive behavior. Firearm availability. Easy access to firearms as a risk factor for violence. Frustration. External interference with the goal-directed behavior of the person. Frustration aggression hypothesis assumes that frustration, that is, blockage of a goal-directed activity, increases the likelihood of aggressive behavior. Gang, an age-graded peer group that exhibits some permanence, engages in criminal activity, and has some symbolic representation of membership. General Aggression Model, GAM, integrative theoretical framework explaining how personal and situational input variables lead to aggressive behavior via cognitive appraisal, negative affect, and physiological arousal. A geographic regions approach. Method for testing the heat hypothesis by comparing violence rates in cooler and hotter climates. Hate crimes. Criminal acts toward individuals by virtue of their membership to certain social groups or categories. Heat hypothesis. Hypothesis that aggression increases with higher temperatures. Hormones. Higher levels of testosterone and lower levels of cortisol have been linked to aggression, but they need to be considered in combination with environmental influences. Hostile aggression. Aggressive behavior motivated by the desire to express anger and hostile feelings. Hostile attribution bias, hostile attributional style. Tendency to attribute hostile intentions to a person who has caused harm when it is unclear whether or not the harm was caused accidentally or on purpose. Hot sauce paradigm. Measure of aggressive behavior in the lab, whereby participants assign a certain quantity of aversively hot sauce to an alleged co-participant who does not like spicy food. I-cubed theory. Theory that explains aggression by the interplay of three factors: instigation, impellence, and inhibition. Implicit association test, IAT. Reaction time measure to assess the speed with which a person can activate aggressive cognitions. Indirect aggression. Aggression delivered behind the target person's back by damaging their social relationships, for example through spreading rumors. In-group favoritism, preferential treatment and evaluation of in-group members solely on the basis of their shared group membership. Instrumental aggression, aggressive behavior performed to reach a particular goal as a means to an end. Intergroup aggression, aggressive encounters between groups or aggression based on group membership rather than individual characteristics. Interpersonal aggression, aggressive behavior between individuals rather than groups. Intimate partner violence, perpetration or threat of an act of physical or sexual violence within the context of an intimate relationship. Irritability, habitual tendency to react impulsively, controversially, or rudely at the slightest provocation or disagreement. Media violence, media, movies, video games, music videos, etc., showing or describing behavior intended to cause harm, especially severe physical harm, to media characters. Media violence aggression link, hypothesis that exposure to violent media content makes users more aggressive. Meta-analysis, quantitative review integrating the findings from individual studies into a common metric of effect size. Narcissism, personality trait denoting a grandiose view of the self and strong sense of entitlement. Naturalistic observation, recording the natural occurrence of aggressive behavior in everyday situations. Observational learning, learning aggressive behavior by observing and imitating the aggressive behavior of others. Official records, data collected for purposes other than research providing information about aggressive and violent behavior, e.g. crime statistics, newspaper reports. Ostracism, ignoring people or excluding them from social interactions. Peer nominations, method for measuring aggressive behavior by asking other people, e.g. classmates, to rate the aggressiveness of an individual. Perspective taking, ability to orient oneself non-egocentrically to the perspective of another person. Physical abuse, the use of severe physical force intended to harm the child's health, survival, development, or dignity. Physical aggression, behavior intended to cause physical harm to another person. Pornography, media material used or intended to increase sexual arousal. Post-traumatic growth, experience of positive change that occurs as a result of the struggle with highly challenging life crises. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, characteristic pattern of symptoms observed in survivors of traumatic experiences such as sexual assault. Prejudice, negative evaluation of others by virtue of their membership in a certain social group or category. Proactive aggression, also called unprovoked aggression, aggressive behavior shown without a prior provocation. Projective techniques, measures of aggressive dispositions in which participants project their aggressive thoughts, feelings, and behavioral intention onto ambiguous stimulus material. Provocation, anger eliciting interpersonal encounter. Psychopathy, constellation of personality traits and socially deviant behaviors, including a narcissistic sense of self, lack of empathy or remorse, poor impulse control, manipulative approach to interpersonal relationships, and antisocial behavior. Rape myth acceptance, endorsement of stereotypical beliefs about rape that deny, downplay, or justify men's sexual violence against women. Reactive aggression, also called retaliative aggression, aggressive behavior shown in response to a provocation. Real rape stereotype, generalized cognitive schema that a real rape is a surprise attack in a dark or isolated place involving the use of physical force carried out by a stranger on an unsuspecting victim who shows strong physical resistance. Relational aggression, Behavior intended to harm the target person through damaging their social relationships. Relative deprivation theory postulates that intergroup tensions arise from the perception that one's own group is unfairly disadvantaged compared with the outgroup. Self-control, capacity to stop, override, or alter unwanted behaviors. Sexual abuse, sexual contact between a child and an adult that is carried out for the sexual stimulation of the perpetrator. Sexual aggression, making someone engage in sexual activities against their will through a range of coercive strategies, such as threat or use of physical force, exploitation of the inability to resist, or verbal pressure. Sexual Experiences Survey, SES, self-report measure to assess the perpetration of and victimization by sexual aggression. Sexual harassment, deliberate or repeated sexual behavior that is unwelcome to the recipient, as well as other sex-related behaviors that are hostile, offensive, or degrading. Sexual scripts, cognitive representations of sequences of actions and events in sexual encounters, serving as guidelines for sexual behavior. Sociobiology, discipline devoted to the study of the evolutionary basis of social behavior. Sociocultural approach, explanation of aggressive behavior as shaped by societal and cultural norms and practices. Social identity approach, explains intergroup conflict as a result of social categorization into in-groups and out-groups and the desire to favor the in-group. Social information processing approach, SIP, theory about social cognitive processes that pave the way to aggressive behavior. Staircase model describes the pathway to terrorism as a succession of steps explaining why, out of large numbers of disaffected people in a society, only very few end up committing terrorist acts. State Trait Anger Expression Inventory, STAXI, measure of individual differences in anger expression, state and trait scales. Steam boiler model, part of Konrad Lorenz's theory of aggression, assuming that aggressive energy is produced continuously within the organism and will burst out spontaneously unless released by an external stimulus. Suicide attacks, assaults intended to achieve a political objective, performed outside the context of a conventional war, in which the assailant intentionally kills himself for the purpose of killing others. Tangram Help Hurt Task, measure of aggressive behavior in the lab whereby participants assign easy, help, or difficult, hurt, tangram puzzles to a co-participant. Tangram puzzles consist of a set of polygon pieces that need to be put together without overlap. Teacher-learner paradigm, measure of aggressive behavior in the lab whereby participants in the role of teachers assign aversive stimuli to an alleged learner. Terrorism, acts of violence by non-state actors perpetrated against civilian populations intended to cause fear in order to achieve a political objective. Terror management theory, terror invoked by the knowledge of mortality induces people to identify more strongly with their cultural norms and worldviews as a way of becoming part of a lasting collective identity that transcends their own physical existence. Theory of mind, ability to form a mental representation of the internal states of other people. Theory of realistic group conflict, explanation of intergroup conflict as a result of competition for resources that only one group can attain. Time periods approach, method for testing the heat hypothesis by comparing violence rates in the same region during cooler and hotter periods. Trait aggressiveness denotes stable differences between individuals in the likelihood and intensity of aggressive behavior. Traumagenic dynamic, experience that distorts the child's self-concept, view of the world, and affective functioning. Twin studies, study design comparing identical and fraternal twins and how similar they are in their aggressive behavior. Verbal aggression, use of verbal means such as insults to cause harm to another person. Violence, behaviors carried out with the intention to cause serious harm that involve the use or threat of physical force. Weapons effect, finding that individuals who were previously angered show more aggressive behavior in the presence of weapons than in the presence of neutral objects. Workplace bullying, also called workplace mobbing or harassment, behaviors intended to cause harm to another person at work over longer periods of time.